Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored with Steve Taplin. Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored, where tech leaders drop the filters and just tell it like it is. I'm your host, Steve Taplin, serial tech entrepreneur. I have 30 companies under my belt, which 20 of those failed, but 10 were big successes. And I turned that roller coaster of a ride into my book, Fail Hard, Win Big. This is my story of how I use failures to propel success, first let it drag me down, and how I've seen firsthand the power of custom software development is a huge differentiator for companies and success. Today, I'm the CEO of Sonatify Technology. We are a nearshore software development company. We help existing and engineering teams, as well as do fully managed projects to help them accelerate their efforts. And today, we are joined by Don Boulia. Don has had a distinguished career as an engineer, as executive at IBM, one of the best tech companies out there, and now Chief Product and Technology Officer at a nonprofit. Don, excited to have you on the show.
Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
Please, if you would, walk our listeners through the journey of your career.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. I got a lot of gray hair, so there's been some experiences, but started my career, always been in software. Actually started with IBM, left IBM for a startup, came back to IBM, and most of my career has been enterprise software, some SaaS and cloud as that became more and more prevalent. And as you mentioned, got into some software engineering executive roles, as well as a product management executive roles, some strategy executive roles as well. So, and really had a great career, but to be honest with you, I got farther and farther away from day-to-day technology. And that was always my passion. That was always the thing I was really there for, was the software. And so I was really looking for an opportunity to be much more hands-on. And Charity Navigator came up as a way for me to really be able to demonstrate my skills, but also really help out a organization that I do believe in. So it's been a great match.
I do believe, and IBM is a great company, but as you're an executive in the engineering side there, you got to be pulled farther and farther away from that actual code and the technology and dealing more with corporate politics and other things. So tell us about Charity Navigator.
Yeah, so Charity Navigator is a nonprofit organization. We're a 501(c), and our mission is really to be able to provide donors with information about other nonprofits. So at some level, we rate other nonprofits based on a methodology that we've developed. From a technology perspective, we take a whole bunch of data in. We apply that methodology to the data, and then the output that people see is either the Charity Navigator website, if you're a donor coming in. Typical example would be somebody saying, really interested in donating to this a nonprofit or cause. Is it a good one? And that's typically the first thing everybody asks. And that's really what the main part of what we do for donors is. And again, technology wise, we also provide that as an API more for the institutional side. So less about individual donors and more about those same questions being asked by corporations who are, again, trying to guide their giving or guide the giving of their employees, for example.
I love it. Are there a lot of companies in this space that do?
There's a couple of companies in this space, but I would say we're the only ones that really go down the path of making, kind of guiding the answer, so to speak. I would say most fall more on the information side. So here's all the information about this nonprofit. You go make your own decision. And we certainly provide that information as well, but we do have a scoring system. So at some level, we are, making a judgment, if you will, on what we think makes a good nonprofit or a nonprofit that is, worth your time and effort to donate to.
As part of the software and the analysis you guys do, and not being an expert in the nonprofit world, but are you able to kind of peel the curtain on the financials to ensure that it's being run appropriately?
Yeah. So the actual founding of this organization was about over 20 years ago, and it was a high net worth individual who was giving a lot of stuff to nonprofit organizations and actually got scammed. And as a result of that, basically went out and hired a bunch of people to go scan through tax forms, IRS 990 data that all the nonprofits have to fill out. And from that came out with kind of the first version of the scoring system. And it was a paper newsletter. I mean, it was that far back. So we've gone from that to obviously everything's been digital and online to, from 9,000 nonprofits to almost 250,000 that we do ratings on. So it's
That's amazing. And I mean, nonprofits are such a good thing, but they get tainted by the few where there's people cheating and using it as tax shelters and doing things they're not supposed to. So love to hear about that. Now you went from an engineer to large corporate. You've been in startups, now a nonprofit. Tell us how your world's different in the nonprofit side versus the other parts of your career.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I've gone from probably largely one of the bigger, if not biggest, at some point, big tech firms to I started at the early part of my career in a startup that was literally a 5-person startup. So I've gone from very small to very
One
large.
extreme to the other.
Yeah, and then this is sort of back to the future from that perspective. The whole organization is less than 100 people, and engineering team is small but mighty, so to speak. And so we really have to. First of all, what I love about it is I can be hands on. It isn't something where I'm 3 or 4 layers away from from the day to day. And we have to pick and choose carefully where we want to invest from an engineering perspective because it is a limited resource. But it's been really fun to get back into that and be able to do things on a daily basis that are really full deep technology. As you mentioned before, when you're running a couple thousand person organization, you don't get paid to write code anymore. You get paid to manage the business. So this has been a good transition from my perspective.
Excellent. Now, and being a CTO is a tough job, and you have the onus of being the technical expert, leading engineers, making sure things are cutting edge. And then probably the harder side of it is translating what you're doing to the non-technical executives and finance and investors. And it's definitely a tough space, and CTOs are often first to blame, good, bad, or indifferent. I always like to ask, so how did you get this role?
Well, as I said, I was looking for a change. I wanted to get back to something that was a lot deeper technology wise, and so I was looking for exactly this kind of role. Now, interestingly, I'd never actually been a CTO. The CTOs were the ones who reported to me in my previous role, so there's a little bit of convincing people to some degree, as you mentioned, that my day job for 25 years didn't mean I wasn't still technical and couldn't do the things that would be required from a hands-on perspective. I think this particular nonprofit does use some IBM technology, so from that perspective, I think my background matched nicely with what they were looking for from that perspective. In my case, I was looking for something where I could really make a difference and where I
Now,
thought I
did,
could make.
did you apply online? Did you have a recruiter?
Well, I certainly did apply online. There was at least one person on the board that I did know, and I think I was pointed originally to that online via that. But from that point on, it was all just the process and going through the interview process.
Do you think if you didn't have that connection on the board, your online application would have been noticed?
I don't know. I think probably it would have, but I would reverse it. I'm not sure they would have been on my radar, in the searches I was doing, which did include CTO. So it wasn't like I wasn't searching that, but I'm not sure it would have hit my radar as well. So I think there's probably a little bit of both to be had in there, but it's been a great experience.
I know there's so much frustration of it's hard in the current times to get a CTO job by just applying and by not knowing anyone. And I hear the frustration all the time. And so that's why I always like to ask, whatever value we can provide to other listeners if they're transitioning or looking for a new role. So tell us about some current projects you're working on.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, the rating system is kind of our bread and butter of what we do here. But at Cherry Navigate, we do provide what I consider to be more of a, online alerts kind of mechanism around nonprofits. So, in addition to the basic rating, for example, if there was a news about a nonprofit that might affect your ability to donate to them or your desire to donate to them, then that's something that we try to, add to the rating. So it's not really part of the rating, but it's a, hey, you should know, for example, that they're being investigated for fraud would be a pretty pertinent piece of information.
That pretty important.
Not that they've actually been, convicted of anything, but if that's going on, you might want to hit the pause button before you actually donate. So most of our alerts today are more in that negative vein of like, caution, caution. What I'd like to be able to do with it though is expand it into information in general, right? So being able to really grab more real-time information about a nonprofit that would be relevant to you as someone who's interested in the nonprofit or interested in donating to them. Not necessarily always bad, but both good as well as things that would be cautionary. So that's a tough technical challenge just because there's just so much data out there.
Sure.
It's one of those things that we're hoping to use AI for, at least in terms of sort of sifting through all the material so that we can have, a much more manageable set of content that a human could look through. I don't see a world where we would just take that raw content and automatically put it on our site, but there's still going to be some oversight there. But if we could get the data filtering down to something that is more manageable, that would make it, I think, a good value add and a good piece of information that's not as static as the ratings, right? Don't change on a daily basis. It's like you said, it's financial information. It's stuff people submitted in their last 990 from an IRS perspective. So while it can change, it doesn't necessarily change as much as some of this real-time information might.
All right. So tell us more about your engineering team that's making all this magic happen. And, tell how many engineers do you have? Are they on-site, remote, hybrid? How do you manage the team?
Yeah, so the core engineering team is small. It's about 5 people, and that includes the director of engineering as part of that. They're all US based, but we do have people in different time zones across the US. We're an all remote organization. Interestingly enough, they went all remote well before I got there, but just happened to do that months before COVID, which made it much better than months later when COVID hits.
So you guys weren't completely blindsided.
Yeah, again, before my time, but they definitely made a good decision there. So, and we've been remote ever since. So, as long as we're within some time zone pain, we kind of navigate core working hours. But otherwise, it's been really good. And so, key engineering challenges for us is with a team that small, we can't afford to have, 85 different technologies where everybody has to have, 85 different skills to be able to do things. One of the things that I've really focused on since coming here is trying to, collapse the number of stacks, the number of languages, the number of different things we have into kind of a core set of, strategic things that AI can hire for on a, easy basis if I need to, or if we need to augment the skills, we can go get them. But not have it be such that, a person coming to Cherry Navigator needs to have, this comprehensive list of things that they know how to do. That's just not in the nonprofit space. That's a killer. Might be a killer in any space, but it's definitely a killer in the nonprofit space.
So what's your current tech stack?
Well, we've actually done quite a bit to reduce that. So when I arrived, we were using something called Cold Fusion. If you're old enough to remember it, it's
Unfortunately, I am. Yes.
I haven't heard that used in probably 10 years. And even then it was old. So it was not a good tech stack to be on. And so retiring some MS SQL and MS Access databases. I mean, there was a hodgepodge of stuff that was just, not just tech debt, but it was honestly just a security risk. It was an everything risk. So we've now collapsed that down. So our kind of ideal stack at this point is a React, TypeScript, I'm a big Tailwind fan if I'm talking about the front end. We use Next.js sort of as the server environment for that. And that's, again, a ready set of skills that people can use. We've standardized on Postgres from a database perspective. And we host on a couple of different cloud providers, but that stack works very well across almost any of them. So it's been useful from that perspective.
Definitely. How painful was it to do that transition and migration?
Super painful. And you mentioned tech debt. The one thing I will say is before I got there, somebody must have gone around to all the constituents and educated them on tech debt, because I didn't have to give any speeches on, here's what we need to do from a tech debt perspective. Everybody kind of was already on board with the fact that needs to, which I find is part of the problem, right? Because tech debt is one of those things that maybe doesn't improve the bottom line directly, and certainly isn't something that's going to generate revenue or, directly make anybody happy, but it's something we got to do in order to be able to move faster and do things better in the future. And so that groundwork had already been laid, which was nice. Getting there, though, was a process, right? This organization had a history of, bringing in consultants to come and do a job, and then the consultant would kind of leave, and nobody really knew what they had done. And so you end up
leave you with a mess, huh?
Yeah, and I mean, stuff, everything from choice of language, choice of, testing framework, choice of framework in general. So like I said, hodgepodge of stuff, even aside from the Cold Fusion stuff. So it's been painful, but we have consolidated it down at this point where I think we're in a much, much better place than we were.
So As we're more than halfway through 2025 as a CTO and Chief Product Officer, what's the biggest challenges you're facing now?
Well, I mean, we're still, I think, challenged by, how and when to use AI appropriately. I mean, that's something and that's not even a tech statement. I've had to author or help author some of those guidelines for the rest of the organization because we have analysts and people in non-technical roles using AI for all sorts of stuff. And maybe not really knowing exactly what they're doing when they do it in terms of, what data they're divulging and releasing and in what formats and environments they're doing that. So that's been a non-technical issue, but on the tech side, it's also how do we make sure we're getting real benefit, right? Everybody wants to jump on AI and for good reason, but at the same time, there's costs involved with it. And most of the time it can automate a lot of the process, but I haven't seen a lot of places where I'd be comfortable with automating the entire process. So it's still has a human in the loop there somewhere. And so coming up with that process and what does that technology stack look like has been probably one of our bigger challenges for
And
this.
it's changing weekly, which
Yes.
makes it even more challenging.
Yes.
Well, on a completely different note, give me the good, the bad, and the ugly of having both the chief product side and the chief technical side.
Well, it's interesting. I guess the good and the bad of it is I was the one complaining about we don't have any product management around here. So I started off as the CTO and then got the P added after the fact. So now I don't complain as much. But at the same time, it's been interesting to kind of get people into a product mindset. I think I took that for granted in the commercial space because you're always building a product. That's just what you do. And in a nonprofit, especially again with the mission and some of the other elements of a nonprofit, the product piece was not obvious to the general staff. And so we did a lot of education on what is a product, what isn't a product, what are the key questions we should be asking about a product, and is it performing, is it doing what it needs to do, and then use that to inform the investment, right? Whether that's engineering or marketing, comms as well as engineering. Both of those teams get tasked with a lot of the work that goes on a daily basis across the organization. So there's always pressure, which thing is the highest priority. And I think the product management process for me anyway is a good way of really testing that and saying, okay, what's our most important things? And, is that where we want to spend our money and our resources? And I don't think actually, I know that conversation was not happening, at least in that manner. So it's been satisfying from that perspective. It still doesn't make it easier. You're still trading off, things you don't want to trade off, but at least we're having the discussion now.
From your experiences, large tech, startup, nonprofit, in the nonprofit world, is there the same drivers for innovation?
It's a good question, and I think it varies a lot. I'd say one of the things that I've been fortunate to have in Chair Navigator is everything we do is digital, and so I think that the notion of technology as being a differentiator is something that was already part of the culture before I got there. So much like the tech debt, I didn't have to go educate anybody on the importance of doing that. So I think that a lot of that groundwork was laid for me, but yeah, we do view it now as definitely a key to innovation. Anything that we're doing that is going to move the needle for donors or move the needle for ourselves from a revenue perspective, it's coming through technology. And now I just have to fight back the urge to make the answer AI for everything. So that's probably my biggest problem is holding people back on some of those things.
Yes, I hear you. Don, you have a couple gray hairs like me, been through a lot. What's one brutal lesson you wish you would have learned earlier in your career?
Well, it's interesting. Like I said, this is really my first CTO experience, but if I were to put it in CTO terms, that consulting approach that was used before really did mess up the infrastructure in this place. Like I said, everybody came flying in with their own way of doing something and then left with whatever mess was behind them. And nobody did any of the work to understand in the organization how to pick that up and move it forward. And one of two things happened. You either end up with the mess, which they did, or you have no ability to improve it yourself. So you've got to continue to go back to that well each time. And, again, nonprofits are not flush with cash usually. So those kinds of things are always expensive to go do. And so you get yourself into this endless loop where you're always trying to chase after that next thing. And it all comes down to fundamentally, there was no real strategy in place of how the technology was going to be used. And so that cleanup as a result, like I said, is super painful to go through it. and it was just kicked down the road for a bunch of years. So as a result, we had a lot of work to do to get back to something that I'd say is, I'm proud of it now, but it was definitely ugly at the start.
So in the nonprofit world, is it challenging to hire and retain quality engineers when you have different limitations?
I think again, I've lucked out, I would say, from the last 2 years at Cherry Navigator has been we have been able to find good engineers and retain them. I would say maybe 5 years before that, it was not nearly as easy. So I think I've benefited from just the way things are right now versus where they were. But yeah, in general, in a nonprofit space, getting and retaining good talent is tough because a lot of the commercial companies are going to be able to pay a lot more, and so we've tried to come up with the right balance of work-life balance, the remote work environment, the focus on technology, and make it a fun place to work. And I think that's helped to some degree. But I think I've also benefited from just the general environment out there. Yeah, and I think in the past, when it was harder for them to hire and retain, that's where you get into using outside talent, which is fine. It's absolutely a great way to do it, but you have to manage the use of it in a way that, you end up, able to maintain and support it after it goes through the process. And that's where I think they kind of fell down, in my opinion, and what we've been cleaning up from since.
Gotcha. Don, thank you so much for getting Uncensored with us today. Appreciate your perspective of the startup, the large corporate, the nonprofit world. You've touched a lot of different things. Before we wrap, what's one final advice for tech leaders out there that you want to leave them with?
I think the thing I've learned is there are a lot of ways to do things. I mean, I reach out to a lot of other CTOs in this role, and you can get things done in a lot of different ways. You just have to have a strategy for what you're doing and make sure that it works for you, right? It could be that you're outsourcing almost everything. It could be that you're building a lot of stuff in-house. Both of those strategies can work, but you got to have a strategy, and you got to understand the implications of both of those strategies come with other tasks. And if you ignore those, then everything goes downhill from there. At least that's
great advice. Thank you, Don. That's it for this episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. I'm Steve Taplin. If you like the show, go ahead and hit subscribe. If you didn't like it, well, tell your competitors about it. Let them benefit from it. Remember to fail hard, win big, and always make sure you build what matters. Thanks, everyone. Until next time. That's a wrap. Another great episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun doing this show. I love talking with great tech leaders. As a side note, if you're interested, check out my new book, Fail Hard, Win Big. This is the story of how I built 30 companies, failed on 20, and turned 10 into multi-million-dollar wins. The common thread with all of them was custom software. Also, if you need software development help out there, my company, Sonatify Technology, we deliver world-class software development engineers out of Latin America. We have a solid track record of helping companies launch better products and faster. Thanks again for listening. Appreciate it and appreciate you.